We do have one question that's come in for Kumayan. What are the KPIs organizations can use when it comes to measuring an insider threat program's success?
Thanks. It's a great question. It's also one of the more challenging questions to try to answer. I think, one of the things that I saw work well in financial services, but it's not specific to that industry, is, most organizations already conduct, and just by virtue of their environment, are already engaged in a number of investigations a year. And those investigations are typically ones that respond to an alleged concern or some level of damage defined by either loss or theft or some other consideration. And I'm not talking about necessarily some of the ones that are more germane to workplace violence or employee relations type issues, but these are the ones that are a bit more quantifiably measurable around loss or theft. By building an insider threat program, the focus, of course, is to increase diagnostic sensitivity to become more proactive. So is there a way to measure against discovery at the earliest point of detection? Did that actually lead to a preventative measure? Did it reduce the number of investigations that actually occurred in an organization? Were we able to eliminate or reduce loss prior to something more significant? Many of the theft cases or fraudulent activity cases that involve loss of money, when you do the autopsy and retrospective look in with the benefit of hindsight, you're able to identify that there were in fact opportunities, had there been some effective way of detecting them, these so-called breadcrumbs. Had we had the opportunity to identify those and address them at the moment in time, we could have prevented a much larger loss. So we've taken that body of evidence from the investigative community and fraud examiner community and others, and we built metrics around that, right? Loss prevention at the earliest point of detection would have prevented something much bigger, and here's the metric associated with it. But it is, as Colonel Birmingham and others said, this is a hard area because when you think of an insider threat program, these are holistic programs, and deterrence is certainly a key element of a program. And deterrence, of course, is the hardest to measure because just because nothing happened doesn't necessarily mean success or failure.
Thank you so much. So once again, if you've missed any of those secret words or you have any questions, info@theknowledgegroup.org is the email address that you need to send them to us. We do have another question that's dropped in for yourself as well. And again, this is open to our other panelists too. When it comes to getting the necessary buy-in from key stakeholders, when you look at implementing an insider threat program, first off, what are the major barriers that you have when it comes to getting those in place, or what have you identified are the common barriers? And really, how do you look to get that necessary buy-in from those key stakeholders?
Sure. Yeah. So first and foremost, security professionals and cybersecurity professionals typically define things in use cases, and those use cases are often very operationally focused. What I was trying to articulate in the first part of my presentation was the idea of tying directly to a core business focus. So if the outcome is revenue growth, then what are the risks and the impacts to revenue growth? If we're going to invest, for example, in R&D, take Apple or IBM as an example, or Samsung, or others. The R&D investment is made in new products to bring to market. And there is a careful calculation around if we're going to spend, I'm making arbitrary numbers up, $10 million for a new function on the iPhone, as an example. I'm expecting a $50 million return on investment. So those calculations are done. I would, and I've seen a lot of my peers do this as well, draw a nexus between covering that $40 million, if you will, as a nexus of supporting why it's important to create a more holistic program, because insider threat programs certainly this depends on scale and size, are a cost-effective deterrent / preventative measure that when you tie to core business value, starts to now speak a language that resonates with more than just one stakeholder. The other area too is right up front, take a two-pronged approach, both grassroots and executive. So start sort of top down as well as bottom up, and engage and bring every potential person who either has a direct and or dotted line nexus to value protecting an organization. So legal, HR, compliance if you work in a compliance or oversight and regulatory environment. Business units, the folks that are actually generating the revenue, bring all of these folks to the table, demonstrate how this actually supports their core business objectives and mission. With legal, it's important to have them right up front because privacy will be at the foremost concern for private sector organizations, right? How far is too far with respect to bringing all of this data and passing judgment on behavior, right? This is the private sector is not has some differences, of course, than some of the government and U.S. intelligence community customers who have clearances, et cetera. There's certain abrogation of rights associated with that in terms of privacy. But here, by conducting things like a privacy impact assessment, collaborating closely with legal, looking at all of the data that you wish to help inform the insider view, the risk view, conduct a PIA, work with them, let them drive that effort, let them make the case that this is inappropriate. Develop ways of anonymizing data so that you're not ingesting PII, as an example. You can anonymize for the analysts, so the analysts don't actually have direct visibility on the actual employee. Leave the codes for decrypting and resolving down to the individual with HR. Create that as part of the business process. Each step allows for mitigating these concerns. Privacy is one of them, certainly. Who has access? Who's watching the watchers, if you will? All of these there are opportunities for very deliberate steps that you can take to help mitigate those risks and concerns that stakeholders would have.